Hello and welcome to another programme in our series 3 in Harmony. And today Simon, Lole and I have come to the depths of Dorset, to Loders, and we're going to chat to Dr Peter Nardone, conductor, composer, organist and singer. So welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you. And in fact, I should be saying welcome to you, because this is one of the many churches in Dorset where I seem to be organist. I've ended up organist here.
It's very beautiful building. I wonder if we could sort of start at the beginning, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what brought you into church music originally and your early inspirations.
Well, it's interesting. If you read my biography, you would think that it was through the choir at Paisley Abbey. But in fact, the reality of this is that it was in a little church in Johnston. I suppose I'd been going to this church 6 or 7 years old with my mum and my sister. And there was an ancient lady who played the organ called Mrs McLaughlin. And she was... I suppose what the Scots would say, she was a big woman. She wasn't huge, but she was a big woman. And she was old, and she had a mole in her face, and she always seemed to wear a big hat and a big coat. It was always cold, and she played the organ quite nicely. And she would let me go up and play the organ at the end. And I used to go and play hymns and things all by ear. I always just played by ear.
What age was this?
I would be 7.
7?
Yes, so I couldn't reach the pedals, but I was really excited by the sound of the organ. Yeah. Anyway, actually, she was a widow as well. Her husband had been an organist. He was, I think, quite a good organist. He ran the old stonemasons at the top of Thornbury in Johnston. I don't suppose you know it.
No.
And she lived as a widow. She lived with her sister. Anyway, I actually found out that she only died a few years ago.
Oh gosh.
I also did the maths and worked out that she was about 48. This ancient woman was about 48 when I was playing the organ age 7.
So when you're 7, they do look quite old.
They all look ancient. That's where it started, and I played in lots of little churches around Johnston. They've pulled them all down. They've taken down St Andrew's Trinity Church and St Paul's Church and the Baptist Church. They've all been demolished. My primary school was demolished. My secondary school was demolished. The Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, where I was educated, that's turned into a Thai restaurant, I think. So
they're telling you something.
Well, I've nothing to go back to. It's a shame I don't have anything to go forward to either, but here we are. It's very nice to be here. So yes, that then led on to sort of Paisley and life as a chorister with George McPhee. Again, George
Who's been there for, is it 50, 60
he arrived in October 1963, 2 years before I was born.
That's
and he's
amazing.
Still there.
That's
and
amazing.
He still plays beautifully.
Wow.
And he still runs a very good choir.
And of course the organ at Paisley Abbey is wonderful. It's got cavaille pipework in it, hasn't it?
Exactly. And George oversaw the first rebuild in 1969, and then another one in 2009. He had worn it out over whatever 40 years, and it's just, he said, I never thought I would do 2 major rebuilds of the same organ in my career.
Yeah.
And your choristership, Peter, was that? Do you just sing on Sundays, or was it during the week as well?
Yes,
it was just a sort of parish church choir, a very fine one.
Yes, it was Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
We did sing even song once a month, and in fact, for all the time that I was in the choir, they were on the BBC circuit. In fact, there are some very nice recordings of BBC evensongs from the sort of late 70s and early 80s that we made at Paisley Abbey. Really extremely good singing, lots of thought to listening to it now, lots of thought to the interpretation of things like Victoria, where the choir sang with great light and shade, but also a sort of, kind of a unity in. It was very choral. It wasn't a kind of bleating tenor section and altos that weren't doing what they were told. It was very choral and very lovely, but a big choir as well.
Yeah.
And did you progress from singing to playing the organ at Paisley as well, or not?
No, I never played the organ. I played for services, but I never had a position as assistant organist in Paisley. In fact, George just did, in those days, he did all of the playing himself, and then he would get John Langdon, who was a colleague of his at the RSAMD. He would come and play for services on a Sunday, sort of Sunday evensong or Christmas time. So George was never off. He never had a Sunday off.
That's extraordinary. And so that sort of took you through your teen years, presumably, at Paisley. But
yes,
and going up to the Royal Scottish.
Well, yes, but in fact, all through that, because a lot of people in Scotland, they just, they choose their local university and just stay at home because it costs. It's cheaper. It's this English thing of going away to study. I think it's different now, but in those days, you would go, if you were from Paisley, you would go to Glasgow University. In my case, it was the Royal Scottish Academy of Music in Glasgow. But then everything starts earlier. I went there at 17, and when I was 20, by the time I was 20, I was doing a postgraduate degree, but as a countertenor at the Royal Academy of Music in Marylebone Road.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that led on to fortunately for me, very luckily being plucked from obscurity to join the Monteverdi choir with John Eliot Gardner, not Sir John Eliot in those days. And I sang with them for 7 or 8 years. But so I started very, very young.
And when did the organ start? Was that while you were at Paisley? Is that when you started having organ lessons?
Yes, I started. Well, no, I had organ lessons with a man called Norman Mitchell, who had been, just prior to that, had been organist at the lovely cathedral up in Kirkwall and had come back down to teach in Glasgow, I think Glasgow High School, one of the... possibly I might have got that wrong. He was teaching in one of the private schools in Glasgow, and he gave me organ lessons in the Church of St James's in Paisley, which no longer exists, of course, as with my entire history it would seem. But yes, and when I went to the academy, George McPhee was on the staff, and he was my organ teacher.
Your organ teacher.
Yes.
And was organ your first study, or was singing your first study?
Organ first study, piano second.
Ah, interesting.
So singing was
my piano teacher, she said to me, I was playing a Brahms intermezzo one day, and she said, could you, you have to know how to sing that phrase. Can you sing it to me? And of course, I think she was expecting me to go, la 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 la, but I didn't. I went la 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 la. I sang in countertenor. Now, much better than I'm doing here 50 years later. But she just said, "What are you doing? What are you doing, labouring away with the keyboard, which you're mediocre at, to say the least? You should be a singer." And she filled in the forms, and she made me apply for a Countess of Munster scholarship, and she made me apply for a Caird scholarship. She did all the work, sent me to London, and I got the Munster scholarship. I sang Howell's King David to Bernagoff Matthews and Janet Baker, neither of whom I knew. Imagine singing King David to Janet Baker. I didn't know them. I was so wet behind the ears, but I got the scholarship, and that enabled me to study in London, which was great.
Yeah. But amazing that you then went on to your distinguished career with the Monteverdi Choir. But I'm quite interested to know how you moved away. Well, you didn't, but how you got into the organ world as well as doing that. I would imagine if I suddenly was in the stratosphere as a singer, I'd never want to go into a church again.
My dear boy, this is
it's an old money thing.
I didn't know what I was going to earn my money with, so I went to Croydon Parish Church as the assistant organist.
Right.
And of course, I don't know, Malcolm, whether you know this, but Simon had been organist at Croydon just prior to my arrival. His assistant, one of his assistants, it was Carl Jackson. Of course, Carl took over the job from you. Carl needed assistant, I came along, I was the assistant at Croydon, and then after 2 years, and of course it didn't come with a house, but the vicar let me live in his flat. A very, very nice man called Colin Hill, who appointed you.
Who appointed me, indeed.
And then a few years later appointed me. He still lives independently, aged 95.
It is extraordinary, yeah.
And in fact, at this point, I'm going to introduce something. Now, this is a surprise for Simon, because I realise that when I left Croydon, I had in my possession a copy of Towns to Wesley with Simon Lole's name on it. And I've had it now probably for many more years than you ever had it. So today, I give you this back.
I'm deeply touched.
And my guilt is gone now.
And what's interesting is that
fingerings everywhere.
Registration.
Registration.
You were taking it seriously, my man.
Yeah, gosh, yes. But happy memories of Croydon? I mean,
very happy. There were some lovely things. Croydon, it was kind of a bit rough and ready those days, you know, because it was we worked in Croydon Parish Church, and of course, it's sort of had an upgrade to
a minster.
Yeah, a minster. I mean, it's what is a minster? I suppose if a parish church is economy, it's kind of the next one up, isn't it? Is it? What would you call it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite a pro-cathedral, but it's sort of halfway between, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
it's sort of senior church.
It's not business class, and it's not top class, which is King's College.
Premium economy.
Premium economy, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So it's premium economy now.
Yeah.
And, but it's good as well.
Yeah.
You know, in those days, I was recruiting for, Colin Hill said, we need the boys' choir to be built up. Not many people, I think, speak in those terms these days. But my brief was to build the boys' choir up, and somebody knocked on my door one day and said, I've been running boys' choirs for years, and you've been appointed to Croydon. Could I come and be your assistant? I have never been an assistant to anybody. And that man was somebody called Martin Howe. He was one of the biggest names in cathedral music. As they always said, Martin Howe, the best cathedral organist England never had. Yes.
And I suppose in those days the RSCM was still at Addington?
Indeed.
So that was on the doorstep.
Yes, and of course it made it very good for recruitment, because actually if you went into a school to recruit for the choir, there were already boys in the school who were singing at St Mildred's Addiscombe or St John Selsdon or Bromley Parish Church or Caterham. There were so many boys' choirs around and going out, stretching out St Mary's Beddington, St James New Malden, and they all had big boys' choirs. So it was very much a strong thing, and that all came from Martin running a Monday choir where all the boys would come into Addington on the Monday.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I had the boys up to, 20, 24.
I mean, I remember in my time, it was always quite hard. I mean, one was always trying to recruit boys, but I remember my first assistant, Richard Jenkinson, and I used to, every Sunday morning, we had to drive round South London, and with parents' permission, we used to pick all these kids up. We used to pick them up at 8:30 in the morning, drive them to the parish church, do the service, then drive them all home again, and do the same in the evening. I mean, it was quite a rigmarole, really, but it was the only way
to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, these days it's very different, and they've got a very good relationship with Wycliffe School, haven't they? And
I think so. I don't know to what extent. It is fantastic, and there's money for the music, and there's money for the organist and the assistant organist, and choral scholars. But I wonder what would have happened had this very wealthy Whitgift Foundation with 3 private schools, if that hadn't actually come in. I don't know that Croydon, because it did it on a shoestring. I know when I started as assistant, I got £350 a year, and then I got £1,000 a year as the organist.
I think I started on £500 a year. Yeah. And of course, the other thing about Croydon Parish Church, physically, where it is situated, you know, it's a bit of a dodgy area now, and you've got a huge road running dual carriageway, and so, you know, it's not the most user-friendly place. I do remember actually a story that was told to me by a previous assistant. Sadly, he's no longer with us, David Leake, who one night, there were always a lot of police patrols around because it was a bit of a dodgy area, and he was in one Saturday night, very, very late on in the evening, playing the organ, very loudly, and two policemen walked past. And there was a light on in the building, and they thought, oh, what's going on here? So they rapped on the door, and David told this story about how he was playing, and he could hear this incessant knocking going on. And eventually he went out and opened the door, and there were these two coppers outside, and they said, what are you doing in here? What are you doing in here? He said, I'm the assistant organist. I'm practicing for the service tomorrow. And they didn't believe him. So he said, come into the church. Only David could have done this. Come into the church, sit down, and I'll play you something. So these two policemen came in and sat down in the choir stalls, and David duly went up to the organ loft, and what did he play? He played from Gilbert and Sullivan, When a Policeman's Lot Is Not a Happy One. Of course, it went over their heads. Totally. I've never forgotten that story.
That's a great story.
It's a great story.
I love good man,
David. You know, I mentioned Colin Hill. The next incumbent was somebody called Colin Boswell. Yeah. And he was a lovely man, and he used to be around for all the choir practices. And it was one cold winter night, he was there. I had all the boys in the little multi-purpose vestry room with
multi-purpose indeed.
And he had left and gone outside, and he came in and he said, Nardy, quick, you've got to come with me. He always called me Nardy. Sure, he's called me the precious nard, which appears in the Bible. It's what Mary Magdalene anointed.
That's right.
Jesus. So he called me the precious nard, Nardone. So I said, so I left the boys. You know, this is before the age of safeguarding in the 80s. I said, boys, get on with the practice, and they continued. And I went out. He took me round to that, and in the snow, lying in the snow. I'm not joking, half naked, face down, there was a young man, and we managed to come in. We got some blankets, we went out, we called the police and the ambulance, and we wrapped him up in blankets. He was either a drug addict or yes, or it was alcohol. But he would not have survived for many more hours, I think.
Wow.
And in fact, when the police turned up, he said, "Oh, I wish you hadn't bothered calling us. You know, it could have solved quite a lot of our problems if this one had gone." And we, after the practice, we were quite moved by this in many ways, but we went off. We always went for a curry, and I went with Colin Boswell, and he said, "Nadia, I can't believe it." He said, "You were in there with these boys, and we were singing Mendelssohn, for he shall give his angels charge over the guitar."
Oh my God!
And this, you know, and I didn't think about it at the time, but he's saying we were the angels.
Yeah.
And you know, and that was terribly moving. So there were lots of things associated with that sort of thing. People breaking in through stained glass windows. There was never a dull moment in Croydon.
No, that's true.
But so great fun, and Colin Boswell is also going strong as well in his retirement. Yeah. Two great priests that I've worked with.
Indeed.
Yeah. And while you were doing Croydon, you were also singing. Did you carry on singing with John Elliott, for instance?
Yes, I had only just started, so I used to say to Martin, "You're going to have to do this on your own," and I would go off and sing in Aix-en-Provence Festival or whatever, and make recordings with Deutsche Grammophon, come back, and they were very happy for me to do that, and I had lots of support. There were people who could conduct the choir, take practices, and so that lasted for 7 or 8 years.
Wonderful to be able to keep those two careers going in balance as well.
I've got a question, something that is often debated in the cathedral and church world, is about, so you were a singer and you played the organ as well. The natural progression of career paths in cathedral music is generally you learn the organ and you can play pretty well, and then you're suddenly thrust in front of a choir, and you don't necessarily know very much about singing. Do you think, as a singer, it's a much better idea to have a singer in front of a cathedral choir, somebody who really understands the voice, or?
I think it's very important to have a musician, because if they respect you as a musician, then they will put their own technique into play and make things work for you. I think if you can be a musician but you can also demonstrate as a singer, then it puts you in a stronger position.
Sure.
But I think that I would say, you know, that many of the best cathedral choirs have been run by organists primarily. There's an interesting thing. When I was at Croydon, I had applied for quite a number of jobs, and I was not being shortlisted. And somebody older and wiser, whom I respected, said to me, "Peter, look, you're complaining about not being shortlisted. There's some things you ought to understand. First of all, you're Scottish." He's talking about the things that are not in my favour. You're Scottish. You're a Presbyterian, you're not an Anglican. You did not go to Oxbridge. You are openly in a relationship with a same-sex partner, and you do not have an FRCO. You can do something about one of these. So I went off, I passed my FRCO in July of that year, and I was shortlisted for Chelmsford Cathedral the following, or that November. Yeah. So he was absolutely right. You know, just by, don't give people reasons to not shortlist you. You can do something. Get an FRCO. And of course, by getting an FRCO, it was hard for me to do that. I'm not a kind of natural note-smith on the organ, but I made myself do it because I wanted not to just have the stigma of being just a choral conductor who can only sing. So
that was the next step then, was it? Chelmsford?
That's Chelmsford, yes.
And you were there 10 years?
12 years.
12 years.
Perhaps we should talk about that another day.
Well, I think that's probably a good moment to sort of wind things up for now, but we want to carry on talking and find out about the next stages in your career, Peter. But it's been wonderful chatting to you.
Thank you.
That was great. That was great.
So I don't shut up once I've started.
No,
Shall I
it's
put the
brilliant.
kettle on?
Yeah, good idea.